Some music doesn't just play, it haunts. It lingers in the corners of your mind, like a dream you're sure you've had, even if you can't remember when. It's not famous, it's not loud, but once you hear it, you never forget it. That's the kind of music Chris Bell made. In the early 1970s, he helped create something that should have been huge, a sound that was sharp and aching and impossibly beautiful. It was everything rock and roll was supposed to be. Honest, emotional, and alive. The band was called Big Star, but fame never came the way it was supposed to. For reasons no one could quite explain, the world looked the other way, and Chris, the heart behind it all, began to slip into silence. So what happens when the world doesn't hear your masterpiece? What happens when the dream you built collapses and takes you with it? This is not a story of charts or radio hits. This is a story of beauty, loss, and the kind of music that's too pure to survive. This is the story of Chris Bell. His is a story steeped in one of rock and roll's great paradoxes. He was the driving force behind a band that created arguably one of the most perfect debut albums in music history, a record that should have made them superstars, but instead vanished almost without a trace. It was a saga defined by a brilliant, fiery partnership with another staggering talent, Alex Chilton, a creative union that burned with genius before collapsing under the immense weight of disappointment. But more than anything, this is the chronicle of a lost soul. A handsome, driven, and deeply sensitive artist from Memphis, Tennessee, who chased an ideal of pop perfection with an obsessive, almost holy devotion. He poured everything he had into creating something beautiful and lasting in a world that often seemed ugly and indifferent. In the end, he succeeded in making his masterpiece, but the deafening silence that greeted it broke his heart and arguably his spirit. He became the forgotten founder of a legendary band, a man who fought for a dream, lost the battle, and left behind a ghost, and a body of work so beautiful it can still make you cry. To understand Chris Bell and the unique, almost unclassifiable music of Big Star, you have to understand the city that birthed them and the time they were so dramatically out of step with. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the golden age of Memphis music was fading. The raw, primal energy of Sun Records, which had unleashed Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash on the world, was a memory. The soulful, gritty funk of Stax Records, the sound of Otis Redding and Booker T in the MGS, was facing its own decline. The wider world of rock music was moving in a different direction. It was getting heavier, louder, and more bombastic. The arenas were being filled by the blues rock thunder of bands like Led Zeppelin and the complex, symphonic ambitions of progressive rock acts like Yes and Genesis. In the American South, a new sound was emerging, a gritty blues-based Southern rock, popularized by bands like the Allman Brothers Band. But Chris Bell and his circle of friends in Memphis weren't listening to any of that. They were Anglophiles, a pocket of teenagers and young adults obsessed with the music coming out of Great Britain. Their gods were the Beatles, the Who, the Kinks, and Badfinger. They were devoted to the art of the perfect 3-minute pop song, a song with shimmering guitars, soaring vocal harmonies, and a melody that could break your heart. They were chasing the sound of the British invasion, years after the invasion itself had ended. This made them profound anomalies. They were a Memphis band that wanted to sound like they came from London. They were crafting concise, beautiful pop songs in an era of sprawling album-oriented rock. Their creative playground was a place that was itself an anomaly, Ardent Studios. Founded by a young engineering prodigy named John Fry, Ardent was a state-of-the-art facility, a musician's paradise tucked away in the heart of Memphis. It was here, with Fry as their mentor and guide, that Chris Bell and his friends had unlimited access to the tools they needed to try and build their own version of Abbey Road in the middle of Tennessee. It was the perfect environment to create something beautiful and pure, completely disconnected from the trends of the day. This isolation would be the source of their magic and the reason for their commercial doom. Christopher Branford Bell, born January 12, 1951, did not grow up with the struggles that defined many of his Memphis musical forebears. He was the child of a privileged household. His father, Vernon Bell, was a successful entrepreneur who owned a chain of fast food restaurants. The family lived in a beautiful home in a wealthy part of East Memphis. From a young age, Chris was afforded every opportunity. He was handsome, intelligent, and artistically inclined, showing early talent not just in music, but in photography as well. But beneath the surface of this idyllic golden youth existence, there was a deep-seated sensitivity and an intense, almost painful perfectionism. He was a driven young man, constantly seeking to master his passions. When he picked up the guitar, he didn't just learn to play, he sought to master the instrument, dissecting the intricate guitar work of heroes like George Harrison and Pete Townshend. In the fertile garage band scene of late 60s Memphis, he formed his first serious bands, with names like The Jinx and Rock City. These groups were deeply indebted to the British sound, playing note-perfect covers of songs by The Who and the Yardbirds. It was in these early bands that he forged a crucial partnership with two other like-minded musicians, a thoughtful bassist named Andy Hummel and a solid, tasteful drummer named Jody Stevens. Together, they developed a powerful musical chemistry. They were already crafting the foundations of the Big Star sound, but they were missing one key ingredient. That ingredient arrived in late 1970 in the form of a local legend. Alex Chilton was a Memphis native who had already tasted the kind of massive fame Chris Bell dreamed of. As the 16-year-old lead singer of the Box Tops, Chilton had a worldwide #1 hit with The Letter, his gruff, soulful voice making him an unlikely teenage pop star. But Chilton had grown to hate the manufactured nature of his fame. He returned to Memphis, disillusioned with the music industry, and was looking to do something more authentic and artistically fulfilling. He was introduced to Chris Bell's band. The chemistry was immediate and combustible. Chris and Alex were a study in contrast, a perfect rock and roll yin and yang. Chris was the meticulous studio craftsman, the sonic architect who would spend countless hours agonizing over the perfect guitar tone or the precise phrasing of a vocal harmony. He was the driven, earnest believer. Alex, on the other hand, was the raw, intuitive pop genius. He was a veteran of the industry, and with that came a certain cynicism. But he also possessed an almost supernatural gift for melody and a raw, vulnerable vocal style that was the perfect counterpoint to Chris's purer, more angelic voice. Together, with Andy Hummel and Jody Stevens, they became Big Star, named after a local grocery store chain. At Ardent Studios, with John Fry behind the console, they began to work on their debut album. The year was 1971, and what followed was a period of intense, almost magical creative synergy. The driving force behind the sessions was Chris Bell. He was the band's de facto leader and producer. He co-wrote many of the album's most iconic songs with Chilton, including the thunderous opener Feel and the anthemic In the Street. But his most profound contribution was his role as the album's sonic architect. He was obsessed with creating a record that could stand alongside his favorite albums, like the Beatles' Revolver and the Who's Next. He labored for days on end, layering dozens of guitar tracks to create a shimmering, orchestral wall of sound. He experimented with microphone placements, with phasing effects, with every tool John Fry could provide. He pushed himself and the rest of the band to the brink in pursuit of perfection. He was known to have spent an entire day just trying to get the right snare drum sound. The result of this obsessive labor was a masterpiece. Released in 1972, Record was and is a stunning artistic achievement. It's a perfect fusion of crunchy, powerful rock, Feel, Don't Lie to Me, gentle, heartbreaking acoustic balladry, 13, The Ballad of El Gudo, and pure, transcendent power pop, In the Street, When My Baby's Beside Me. Chilton's world-weary rasp and Bell's clear, sweet tenor intertwined in gorgeous harmonies. The guitars chimed and roared. It was the sound of four young men pouring every ounce of their talent and passion into a single, flawless statement. It was a record that sounded, by all rights, like a massive hit. The band, and especially Chris Bell, waited for the world to notice. The world did not notice. In one of the most tragic and infuriating tales of music industry malpractice, Record was a catastrophic commercial failure. The album received rave reviews from the few rock critics who heard it. Publications like Rolling Stone and Billboard praised it as one of a kind. The potential was enormous, but the album never had a chance to reach the public. Their record label, Ardent Records, had signed a distribution deal with Stax Records, the legendary Memphis soul label. But Stax at that time was in a state of chaos. The company had no experience in promoting and distributing a white rock band, and their own internal and financial problems meant that they completely fumbled the release. The record simply never made it into the stores. Fans who heard a song on the radio and went to buy the album couldn't find it. The distribution pipeline was broken. The album, which Chris Bell had poured his entire soul into creating, died on the vine due to sheer corporate incompetence. For Chris, this was not just a disappointment. It was an existential blow. He had created something he believed was perfect, something that was destined for greatness. The world's indifference, its deafening silence, was something he could not process. He had based his entire sense of self-worth on the belief that his art would be validated by success. When that validation didn't come, he shattered. His disillusionment was swift and absolute. He began to lash out, getting into physical fights with his bandmates. The creative partnership with Alex Chilton, already frayed by their different approaches, fractured completely. In late 1972, after a disastrous music industry conference, where it became clear that no one knew who they were, Chris Bell quit the band he had founded. He spiraled into a deep depression. He began to heavily abuse drugs, including heroin and cocaine. In a desperate attempt to erase his own creation, he went to Ardent Studios and began destroying the master tapes of the record sessions. It was a symbolic act of self-immolation, an attempt to kill the dream that had so profoundly betrayed him. He left Memphis, embarking on a soul-searching journey through Europe, trying to find a new identity, a new purpose. But the ghost of his failed masterpiece would follow him everywhere. The years following his departure from Big Star were a period of intense personal and spiritual turmoil for Chris Bell. He was adrift, a man who had lost his moorings. He struggled with his mental health, his drug use, and with fundamental questions about his place in the universe. It was during this dark wilderness period that he found a new and equally intense obsession: religion. He became a born-again Christian, embracing his faith with the same all-or-nothing perfectionism he had once applied to his music. This spiritual struggle became the central theme of the music he began to create on his own. Periodically, between his travels and his personal battles, he would return to Ardent Studios, often late at night, to work on a new set of songs. These were not sessions for a formal album. They were intensely personal recordings, musical diary entries that chronicled his anguish, his doubt, and his desperate search for redemption. The songs from this period, which would eventually be released posthumously as the album I Am the Cosmos, are some of Salutohi's most raw, vulnerable, and emotionally devastating ever put to tape. The title track is a 7-minute epic, a cry of cosmic loneliness and romantic despair. You and Your Sister is a fragile, heartbreakingly beautiful acoustic ballad featuring the harmony vocals of his old rival, Alex Chilton, in a brief moment of reconciliation. Songs like Better Save Yourself and Make a Scene grapple directly with his newfound faith and his old demons. The music is brilliant, but it is also deeply troubled. It is the sound of a man wrestling with his own soul. Some have interpreted his intense religious devotion and the torment in his music as being connected to a struggle with his own sexuality. In the conservative South of the 1970s, being gay was not something that could be openly expressed, and for a devout Christian, it would have created a profound internal conflict. While Chris never spoke publicly about this, some of those closest to him believe it was a major source of the pain that fueled his art and his personal struggles. Despite the brilliance of these solo recordings, he couldn't secure a record deal. The music was too raw, too personal, too out of step with the slick sounds of the mid-70s. He pressed a single of I Am the Cosmos backed with You and Your Sister, but like #1 record, it went nowhere. The cycle of disappointment continued. Eventually, his musical ambitions seemed to extinguish. He returned to Memphis for good, taking a job at his father's restaurant, Danvers. The brilliant artist, the sonic perfectionist, was now flipping burgers and working a cash register. The dream, it seemed, was finally over. On the night of December 27, 1978, Chris Bell was driving home from the restaurant. He was just a few blocks from his house. He reportedly lost control of his small Triumph sports car, hitting a telephone pole. The impact killed him instantly. He was just 27 years old. There was no fanfare, no major headlines outside of Memphis. One of the most gifted musicians of his generation was gone, his life's work almost completely unknown to the wider world. For years after Chris Bell's death, Big Star remained a secret, a cult band whispered about by record collectors and other musicians. But a funny thing happened. That secret began to get out. A new generation of artists in the 1980s who were forming the foundations of what would become alternative and indie rock discovered record. In Big Star's music, they heard a blueprint. They heard the combination of loud, powerful guitars and beautiful, fragile melodies. They heard the sound of heartbreak and hope, all wrapped up in a perfect pop song. Peter Buck of R.E.M., Paul Westerberg of The Replacements, Evan Dando of the Lemonheads. The list of artists who have cited Big Star as a primary influence is a veritable hall of fame of alternative rock. They took the sound that the world had ignored and they carried it into the mainstream. Big Star, the band that couldn't sell any records, had become one of the most influential bands of all time. And with the renewed interest in Big Star came a new interest in its lost founder. In 1992, 14 years after his death, Chris Bell's solo recordings were finally collected and released as the album I Am the Cosmos. At last, the world got to hear his singular, undiluted voice. The album was hailed by critics as a lost masterpiece, a work of breathtaking vulnerability and raw beauty. The legacy of Chris Bell is therefore a dual one. With a Big Star, he is the co-creator of the template for modern power pop. He is the architect of a sound so influential that its DNA can be heard in thousands of bands that followed. As a solo artist, he is a patron saint of the tortured artist, a symbol of the profound beauty that can be wrought from personal pain. His life and work have been immortalized in the acclaimed 2012 documentary Big Star, Nothing Can Hurt Me, and the definitive 2018 biography There Was a Light, which have brought his story to an even wider audience. In the end, what are we to make of the beautiful, tragic life of Chris Bell? He is often called one of music's great, beautiful losers. He lost the battle for fame and fortune in his own lifetime. He died believing his life's work had been a failure, but he was wrong. He won a far greater victory. He achieved a kind of artistic immortality that is reserved for a very few. He created music that was so pure, so honest, and so perfectly crafted that it could not be silenced forever. It just had to wait for the world to be ready to listen. His story is a heartbreaking reminder of the immense personal cost that can accompany great art. It's a cautionary tale about the cruelty of the music business and the fragility of the human heart, but it is also ultimately a story of redemption. The sound that was once met with silence now resonates in the hearts of countless listeners. The lost soul from Memphis finally found a home. The songs he bled for, the beautiful ghosts he sent out into the world, are still here, and they can't be heard anymore. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.